The suit that he threatened was in the millions of dollars. They eventually agreed on this $380,000 figure, in addition to handing over the copyrights of a picture of them in bed together. Now, I want to read a statement that we have from Jimmy Bennett's attorney. It says, in part, at this time, our client, Jimmy Bennett, does not wish to comment on the documents or the events discussed in the New York Times article. My office will reach out once he is prepared to deliver his official response. But for people looking at this, it's going to, for many, seem like the pinnacle of hypocrisy. And you think about the fact that this settlement was made, and it was not that long afterwards that Asia Argento went to the Cannes Film Festival and made a very impassioned speech that caught a lot of people's attention.
Stephanie Goff, more to come, I know. Thank you for all your reporting on this. And that's going to wrap up this hour of MSNBC Live. I'm Chris Jansing. Katie Tur. Who am I? Ron Burgundy? That's so wrong. And yet, perhaps today, so right.
I live in a glass house. I should not be throwing stones. Everyone knows my problems with the teleprompter. Chris Jansing. Good to see you. It's 11 a.m. out west and 2 p.m. in Washington, where a New York Times report about White House counsel Don McGahn and his extensive cooperation in Robert Mueller's Russia investigation seems to have sent the president and his legal team into a panic. Just what did McGahn reveal when he met with the special prosecutor 3 times for 30 hours? Trump claims he knew all about that cooperation. In fact, he says he demanded it. And he's called reports that suggest otherwise fake news. But if we were to judge Trump's mood by his Twitter feed, a very different narrative emerges. He's fired off no less than 10 tweets about the Russia investigation in the past 24 hours, including one that takes a particularly sharp jab at the special counsel directly, calling Mueller, quote, disgraced and discredited. Then there's Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani. This week he told Chuck Todd, truth isn't truth. But here is the truth. We don't know what McGahn said to the special counsel, and neither, it seems, does Rudy Giuliani.
We have a good sense, obviously, of what Mr. McGahn testified to. I can figure it out from...
How do you say that good sense? Have you debriefed him?
No, but Mr. Dowd has a good sense of it. He talked to them at the time.
So you don't know what Mr. McGahn... You don't know 100% of what he testified to Mr. Mueller?
I think that through John Dowd, we have a pretty good sense of it. And John Dowd yesterday said, I'll use his words rather than mine, that McGahn was a strong witness for the president. So I don't need to know much more about that.
White House counsel Don McGahn has extraordinary access to the commander-in-chief, and he's been witness to key moments in this presidency. He was there when Comey was fired. He heard Trump's constant criticism of Attorney General Jeff Sessions following his recusal from the Russia investigation, and reportedly threatened to quit when Donald Trump asked him to fire Robert Mueller, and then told him to lie about Donald Trump asking him to fire Robert Mueller when the New York Times found out. In a statement that did nothing to tamp down speculation, McGahn's attorney said this: President Trump, through counsel, declined to assert any privilege over Mr. McGahn's testimony, so Mr. McGahn answered the special counsel team's questions fulsomely and honestly, as any person interviewed by federal investigators must. So the big question we're asking today is, was it a good strategy to let the White House lawyer talk to Mueller? Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Kristen Welker, White House reporter for the Associated Press Jonathan Lemire, political reporter for the New York Times Ken Vogel, and editor-in-chief of Lawfare and senior fellow in governance studies at Brookings Institution, Ben Wittes. Jonathan and Ben are MSNBC analysts and contributors. Kristen Welker, let's start with you at the White House. The president's team is trying to say that Donald Trump knew all along that McGahn was going to testify and they weren't worried about it. The president's tweeting about this. Rudy Giuliani tried to, cool it down yesterday on Meet the Press on Sunday. But the New York Times say that Trump's lawyer's sudden realization they don't know what Don McGahn told Mr. Mueller's team is actually pretty rattling. They write, Mr. McGahn and Mr. Burke feared that Mr. Trump was setting up Mr. McGahn to take the blame for any possible wrongdoing. So they embraced the opening to cooperate fully with Mr. Mueller in an effort to demonstrate that Mr. McGahn had done nothing wrong. Kristen, where does the White House stand today?
Well, I think you capture the key piece of this, Katie, which is that the president's legal team, both in that interview with Chuck Todd and then according to the New York Times, is acknowledging that they don't know everything that McGahn told the special counsel. I also think what you're seeing, Katie, is a very different strategy now from the president's legal team than the one that he initially had when his legal team was made up of Ty Cobb and John Dowd. And they sort of had this strategy that was, let's give all of the information we possibly can. Let's be as transparent as possible. Let's make as many officials available as possible to sit for an interview with the special counsel with the goal of having this wrapped up as quickly as possible. By the way, there were a lot of people inside the president's orbit who disagreed with that strategy. They thought it was going to backfire. Rudy Giuliani, again, trying to downplay any potential issues with the strategy. But Katie, the bottom line is Don McGahn, as you mapped out, had access to, had awareness about a lot of information from the early days here in the White House, a lot of the early days that the special counsel is looking at. And so it's not clear what exactly he told him. Did he, in fact, testify in a way that would be favorable to President Trump? We just don't know that, and we can't say that right now. Katie.
Ken Vogel, part of the reason it's believed that Don McGahn was so transparent with the special counsel's team is because he believed that the president and his legal team was going to throw him under the bus. And this stems from reporting that you did last fall in September of 2017. Let me read you a piece from your reporting. This is of Ty Cobb, by the way. At lunch, you overheard this. The friction escalated in recent days after Mr. Cobb was overheard by a reporter for the New York Times discussing the dispute during a lunchtime conversation at a popular Washington steakhouse. Mr. Cobb was heard talking about a White House lawyer he deemed a McGahn spy and saying Mr. McGahn had a couple documents locked in a safe that he seemed to suggest he wanted access to. So the lawyers are clashing. Cobb wants to cooperate with the special counsel. McGahn is saying, hey, I want to know how much executive privilege the president is going to assert.
Yeah, that's right. And what's so notable about that conversation is that Don McGahn was the one who was the advocate for asserting executive privilege and for pumping the brakes on cooperation in the name of executive privilege. And he could sense, maybe not before, but certainly after we wrote that story of that overheard conversation, that things were not headed his way. In other words, that the president's lawyers, Dowd and Cobb, had decided that they were going to adopt this strategy of a more sort of robust cooperation and document production to the special counsel, and that McGahn might find himself on the short end of that stick, potentially even, as you alluded to and we suggest in our reporting, thrown under the bus and set up as the guy who is somehow obstructing the inquiry. So he did a full 180, and not only did he come around to the other side's thinking and cooperating with the special counsel, but was at the leading edge of cooperation to the point where the president's legal team doesn't even know the full extent of what he may have shared.
So, John, what is McGahn right now? Because Politico is reporting that McGahn is seen as an undercover operative in the White House. The president is tweeting about McGahn. He said this, talking about a fake New York Times piece that he's calling fake, and he's trying to say that the New York Times says he must be a John Dean type rat, but I allowed him and all others to testify. I'm confused that he's referring to John Dean as a rat. John Dean's one of the only people that's seemed to come out well in the Nixon-Watergate saga. So what is Don McGahn for the president today?
You're right. First of all, the John Dean comment from the president there feels like an illuminating one, where he suggested that someone who stepped forward and did the right thing was a rat, and perhaps sending a signal to members of his own staff or people in his orbit. Perhaps not coincidentally, we suddenly have Michael Cohen and his team talking to John Dean as well. But back to Don McGahn, I think that he is someone who people in the White House have been a little suspicious of for a time, for the reasons you just outlined. He has been someone who's been eyeing the exits for a while. Rumors about his departure persisted for months and months. Certainly, as Chris had said, this was reflective of a different type of legal strategy at the beginning. With Dowd and Cobb, they wanted to believe in taking the president at face value, saying, I didn't do anything wrong, let's cooperate, let's get this over with. McGahn became part of that. Since then, we have seen a dramatic shift in tactics here from the president, emblematic with Rudy Giuliani being on board, where it's just attack. And in fact, the numbers, if you look at the times that Donald Trump is singling out Bob Mueller by name, it has spiked dramatically in recent months, reflective of this. As that probe seems to be closing in on the White House, they have upped their attacks.
The president just says he's fighting back.
He does, and he believes that he's entitled to do that, including talking about Paul Manafort, while the jury is deliberating, going to bat for his former campaign chairman, which seems like perhaps an attempt to influence the deliberations there that are still ongoing. We know he's a counterpuncher, we know all the cliches he's going to fight, but at some point there are lines that he has seemingly crossed in terms of his legal defense.
Ben Wittes, look at this graphic from the Washington Post. These are all the people that Donald Trump has fired or threatened, and these are most of the senior officials related to the Russia investigation. The president, at the same time, Ben, is saying that he's allowing Don McGahn to talk, but his actions, the way he's threatened Robert Mueller, the way he's demanded that Jeff Sessions unrecuse, the way he demanded McGahn fire Mueller and then demanded McGahn lie, according to the New York Times, about his demand of firing Mueller when the New York Times found out about it. They seem to be in direct conflict with each other.
Yeah, so I think the first problem is that, people like you do not take him at his word when he tweets no collusion and witch hunt, and he finds that very frustrating. And the second problem is that, when he tries to cooperate because he thinks he has nothing to hide, what happens is that the people around him tell the prosecutors about his behavior, which isn't necessarily exculpatory talk. And then when he gets upset and tries to sort of thrash back, he ends up exacerbating that with public conduct and private conduct that those people are then witnesses to. And so, he gets angry at Mueller and he, tries to fire Mueller, and who does the instruction go to? It goes to Don McGahn, who's then cooperating with Mueller himself. And so, look, the basic problem is that he's in a world of legal hurt. He's surrounded by lawyers who are not competent. And, we skated over this, but discussing legal strategies in the presence of Ken Vogel in a public place is not normal legal behavior. And if you compound those things one on top of the other, you make the situation worse very, very quickly, so, and that's what's happened here.
Was it a bad idea to allow McGahn to talk to the special counsel to not exert any executive privilege?
So, asked that way, the question is very hard because, in fact, the executive privilege claim here probably would have been pretty weak, and he may well have lost it. What was certainly a terrible legal strategy was to allow your lawyers to talk about the case, and McGahn in particular, in the presence of Ken Vogel, who then correctly and reasonably and very ably reports the matter in a fashion that freaks out Don McGahn, who thinks he's being thrown under the bus, who then has no incentive not to be maximally forthcoming with Bob Mueller after, by the way, doing what a good lawyer should. He appears to have advised Trump against the strategy of letting him go testify at great length for 30 hours without asserting any privileges. But having lost that fight, takes the opportunity to make clear to the prosecutors that the problem isn't him and that whatever misconduct took place was not his. And I think if you ask the narrow question about the legal strategy, it's a very hard question. But if you look at the broader pattern that led to McGahn's disclosure to Mueller that the New York Times reported over the weekend, it's shockingly bad lawyering over a long period of time, the culmination of which is Rudy Giuliani sitting there and not even being able to give a coherent answer to the question, do you know what it is he talked to Mueller about?
No, he couldn't give that answer. Speaking of Rudy Giuliani on Meet the Press, Kristen Welker, he now infamously said that facts are not facts. Today, he's trying to clarify that. I'm sorry, no, truth isn't the truth. He's trying to clarify that today and saying when there's a he said, she said, or he said, i.e. with Comey and Trump, You can't just have one set of facts because all you have are the he said and the he said. My question is, are they not taking into account credibility? When they do that, do they seriously believe that calling James